Nowhere on earth is there such an awesome combination of power and beauty as Niagara Falls. Rightfully named the seventh wonder of the world, this magnificent beauty helps drain one of the world's largest freshwater reservoirs from the Great Lakes region into the Niagara River. It is here the water dramatically drops 157 feet to create Niagara's challenge. Be careful not to get too close. The mighty roar and cascading water is enchanting. One must be careful not to become overwhelmed by its charm. There is something compelling in this massive display of water that brings out feelings of joy, even fear. Capture its eternal beauty with your camera, but do not touch its thrashing waters. The early Iroquois Indian believed that beneath this towering mist and shimmering rainbow dwells Hinu, the god of thunder. According to early Indian legend, sacrifices were frequently made to secure peace and good health for the tribe. During one diseased and famine period, the chief's own daughter was sacrificed. You can hear Hinu's thunderous voice even now, but be forewarned not to listen too intently. The early Indians may have cautioned that the great roaring god could be both merciful and brutal. Focus your camera on Roger Woodward as he reminisces from the Maid of the Mist. As an innocent child of 7, Roger and his sister Deanne shared one of the most remarkable incidents in the history of the Falls. Both Roger and Deanne were riding in a small boat with Jim Honeycutt, a friend of the family. The boat drifted past the safety point on the upper river about a mile above the falls and was caught in the swift current. The water quickened and smashed the propeller on the rocks. The turbulence threw them from the boat. Roger's sister attempted to swim toward the side. A crowd had gathered along the edge of Goat Island looking on helplessly, too stunned to respond. It was here that John Quattrochi and John Hayes, 2 visitors to the falls, ran along an 18-inch ledge on Terrapin Point, only yards from the brink of the falls. Hinu's roars drowned Deanne's screams as she reached out at the last instant and grabbed Hayes' thumb. Then, with one leg hooked around the base of the rail, Quattrochi stretched out and latched onto Deanne's life jacket and pulled her to safety. Meanwhile, Roger Woodward clung to Jim Honeycutt until they reached the precipice where they were forced apart. Roger's life jacket and light weight made it possible for the water to throw him out, free from the pounding water below. The river was not so merciful for Jim Honeycutt, whose body was found 4 days later. The Maid of the Mist's captain sighted an orange blob in the water and immediately threw a lifeline to the frantic boy. Later in the hospital, with only a bruised cheek, Roger told reporters, "I could feel I was falling. I was holding on to Jim, but I had to let go. Then I was falling and I thought I hit some rocks." Hinu had been merciful to Roger Woodward. He had become a reluctant celebrity, the only one ever to go over the falls with a mere life jacket and survive. In its time, Niagara Falls was one of those irresistible challenges, and for nearly a century, the center for numerous daredevils. It is hard to understand why anyone would purposely challenge Hinu to needlessly risk his life. Yet the fortune hunters, the seekers of fame, came to the falls with all sorts of peculiar stunts and contraptions. The first of these circus-like entertainers started about a half-mile downriver from the falls. Nearly 500 feet above the river, they had stretched a rope 1,300 feet across the gorge. Here, where the wind sweeps through the narrow canyon walls, the first stunters walked their way to riches and fame. Photography was still in its infancy when these pictures were taken. One by one, they waltzed across the gorge, blindfolded, with a wheelbarrow, or even with baskets on their feet. One aerialist rigged an elastic rope to the tightrope and hurled himself toward the river so that he would spring up and down like a yo-yo over the water. The first and best known of these tight walkers was a Frenchman nicknamed Blondin. His fearless pursuits brought him instant fame and popularity. Not to be outdone by his competitors, Blondin offered a prize to any volunteer who would cross the gorge on his back. Needless to say, not one volunteer came forth, so Blondin drafted his manager, Harry Colcourt, to mount his back and embark on an unforgettable journey across the gorge. Harry, do not undertake to balance yourself. Even if you think we are falling, do not try to adjust yourself, warned Blondin. With those words of advice, Blondin strolled out from the Canadian side. Halfway across, Blondin was forced to rest. The extra 145 pounds on his back caused the rope to sag nearly 50 feet in the middle. Blondin was tiring under the staggering weight and stood while Colcourt carefully dismounted and clung breathlessly to Blondin's waist. There were no guy wires in the middle, and the rope began to sway. Colcourt chanced a glimpse at the raging river beneath and panicked. He clung frozen to Blondin's back until he could be reassured. 5 more times, Colcourt dismounted, each time advancing a little further up the incline. One last dash, and they reached the guy wire where he placed his foot to steady himself. The guy wire broke with a sudden jerk, and Blondin's pole bobbed like the wings of a bird until he had once more gained his balance. Someone had tampered with the wire to ensure their bet. A massive crowd had gathered at the rope exit, blocking their way. Blondin gathered his strength and rushed the remaining yards to emerge in the crowd. Men wept and women fainted as they swept the 2 men to their shoulders. In the next 40 years, everything imaginable was performed over the river, including washing clothes and cooking a meal in the middle of the rope. This period was only a prelude to other reckless adventures and dares. Encouraged by their successes, the next generation of daredevils boldly moved down to the river itself. Still not arrogant enough to challenge the great god of the falls, they selected the second most awesome spectacle, the Niagara Rapids and Whirlpool. Here where the river narrows, the water is forced through the walls of the gorge to create one of the most violent rapids in the world. Before the power intakes were built for hydropower, the rapids would jump sometimes 40 feet in the air and then break into the open river where it turns to create a giant whirlpool. The rapids even today jump 30 feet. The once giant whirlpool is now reduced to miniature pockets, but still is very dangerous. In 1975, there was an attempt to offer tourist raft rides through these rapids. On one such test ride, a 37-foot raft overturned, drowning 3 passengers. At a time before the huge water intakes above the falls, Captain Matthew Webb, the first man to swim the English Channel, was looking for new claims to fame and money. This turbulent stretch of water became his next challenge. I will let the current carry me downstream using my swimming strength to make sure I stay in the middle away from the rocks, proclaimed the captain. When the water gets very bad, I will go under the surface and remain beneath until I am compelled to come up for lack of breath. The captain went under the water, shot halfway out, and then disappeared somewhere in the whirlpool, where he was sucked down for nearly 4 days. The river had demonstrated its danger, but this was not enough to stop them. This time in 1886, a cooper from Philadelphia, Carlisle Graham, would build a strong oak barrel to ride through the rapids and whirlpool. Mr. Graham, turn this way for a second, please. Thank you. Carlisle went through the rapids the first time unscathed. A month later, he rode with his head sticking out of one end of the barrel. A wave battered him and caused permanent deafness. The river's revenge for Graham meant that he would no longer hear its rushing sounds. If you want a photo of a real hero, focus your camera on Red Hill Sr. Although Red is credited with riding the rapids 4 times and swimming across the river above the rapids, it is his courage in saving 26 people and recovering 177 bodies from the river that makes him famous. Red respected the river and knew its ways. There were many who passed through the gorge in all sorts of crafts. Not all of these exhibitionists were fortunate, for the river and its mood would sometimes devour them at the whirlpool. Now only their crafts remained on display as a reminder of their wild adventure. There was still another craze going on at the falls during this period, but in the winter. Niagara's winter scenery is truly the master magician's most beautiful work of art. The cold air transfers the mighty cascades of water into sheer crystal diamonds and smooth mounds of white. The once powerful roar is muffled beneath the large chunks of ice and snow. On extremely cold winter days, when the wind gusts off Lake Erie and down river, large chunks of ice are forced over the falls and cause the ice to jam in the gorge as one massive sheet. When the wind dies, the water level drops and creates a natural ice bridge, a worthy subject to photograph. For years, this ice bridge and ice mountain became the focus of a new adventure, a modest dare for the tourist, so popular in its time that they would slide down the ice mountain and even erect shanties for sale of novelties and liquor. All seemed very calm and peaceful on top. However, under the ice was the eternal power of Niagara, masked by the winter's beauty. Those on top were intruders in this natural setting, and it would only be a matter of time before they would be forced to move. The ice bridge broke unexpectedly in 1912, catching 3 tourists on a glacier of ice in the middle of the river. The ice started to move slowly down the river. Word reached the people by radio, and thousands lined the banks of the river. Ropes were secured and thrown from the bridge, hoping to save them before they passed underneath. It was hopeless. They were last seen before going under, embraced and kneeling at the Whirlpool Rapids. The river had shown its more deceitful side and waited for the next self-sacrificer to challenge its natural laws. It was soon to come from a most unsuspecting source. In 1901, Annie Taylor, a 43-year-old schoolteacher, prepared to go over the falls. No one had contrived such a ludicrous stunt, much less a woman in a small wooden barrel. It was in November, and approximately 3,000 thrill-seekers had gathered 1 mile above the falls to witness the event.
Stand back so we can take a few pictures, please. Stand back. All right, let the reporter by.
Miss Taylor, would you tell the news why you're doing this?
Simply to raise money for 2 needy friends and to pay off some of my debts.
Aren't you afraid of what might happen?
Sir, robbers once stopped my stagecoach and took $3,000 from the men in the coach. Then they placed a loaded pistol to my head and demanded $800 that was concealed in the folds of my dress. I told them to blow away. I would as soon be without brains as without money.
We're told your barrel is only 4.5 feet tall.
Yes.
But weighs 160 pounds?
That's right. We weighted it with an anvil to keep it upright in the water.
What if it breaks through? Will you swim?
Sir, I'm a non-swimmer.
All right, gentlemen, that's enough. We have to tow Mrs. Taylor out to the middle and cut her loose.
Mrs. Taylor, one last picture.
Au revoir. I'll not say goodbye. I'm coming back. I believe in prayer. God will answer if only there is faith.
Good luck, Annie.
so great. Only after the barrel hit the churning water, it kept spinning me around and around and carrying me back under the falls again. That's when I began to suffer, and I think I fell unconscious.
Annie Taylor had been tossed from the arms of Hinu and survived to tell her story. Unfortunately, she'd never made her fortune. She returned to the falls after a brief lecture tour as the Queen of the Mist to sell her autographed pictures. 20 years after her big event, she was buried in a pauper's grave in Niagara Falls, New York. Annie had challenged the falls and survived, only to die poor and disillusioned. It would take 10 years before anyone attempted such a perilous voyage. This time it came from an English professional stuntman named Bobby Leach. Unlike Annie Taylor, Bobby vowed to make money and fame with 3 separate stunts. He first journeyed down the rapids in a barrel and was rescued in the whirlpool where he had fallen unconscious. Then he successfully navigated over the falls where he smashed his kneecaps and broke his jaw. After 6 weeks in the hospital, he parachuted off the suspension bridge. His daring had brought him money and fame, but he ultimately died when he slipped on an orange peel while walking down a street in New Zealand. The risk was great, but after all, the rewards of fame and money were worth it. The great God had been most merciful. Surely he would permit Charles Stevens, the father of 11 children, to earn wealth for his family. In 1920, Stevens followed Taylor's lead and built an oak barrel with a 100-pound anvil in the bottom to keep it upright. The anvil was tied to his feet when he went over the falls and tore through the bottom of the barrel, ripping his body from his limbs. All that was found was one tattooed arm still in the harness of the barrel. Only 8 years after Stevens' tragedy, a French-Canadian named Jean Lussier designed a 6-foot rubber ball consisting of a steel frame with 32 inner tubes. On July 4th, 1928, he bounded over the falls and disappeared for about a minute beneath the swirling water. Jean emerged and claimed his only fear was that the police would stop him before he had gone over the falls. The next episode in this ongoing circus occurred only 2 years later. A Greek chef and mystic from Buffalo named George Stathakis would attempt the same stunt in a barrel made of wood and steel. George's reason was different from the others. He was a mystic who believed he had a message to impart to the world. Without testing his craft, Stathakis set out to challenge the thunderous god. With a barrel weighing nearly 1 ton and 3 hours of oxygen supply, Stathakis took his pet turtle with him and plummeted over the precipice. The momentum carried him below the surface, where he became a self-made prisoner. The water pounded over his barrel, holding it in position under the water for 22 hours. Stathakis died an agonizing death by suffocation. Only his turtle survived. The next daredevil came from an unexpected source. Red Hill Jr., the son of the famed Red Hill, was determined to do something no other Hill had performed. In his contraption called the Thing, consisting of 13 inner tubes strapped together with canvas and fishnet, he dropped over the falls. Of all people, Hill knew the dangers of the water. The Thing hit a sharp rock and flipped into the air. The netting was coming apart even before young Red had reached the falls. A red mattress and tangled tubes surfaced below the falls. Red Jr.'s mangled body was found by his family the next day. Needless to say, the risk involved in going over the falls never seems to stop the stunters. Nathan Boya, the next stunter, however, was unlike his predecessors. To master the falls for him was to conquer his own fears. In a ball fashioned after Lucier's ball and called the plungosphere, he would become the 6th to go over. No one actually saw the sphere drop over the falls, but it appeared unexpectedly near the Canadian shore by the base of the falls. Boya was arrested, and after quietly paying his fine, he disappeared. He, of all the stunters, was a mystery man, leaving the falls with what is believed to be a fictitious name and a cryptic message found inside the sphere. Plungosphere, step from your pit of darkness into light. With that message, Boya left the falls in 1961. Perhaps the ultimate challenge came from a group of Army engineers in 1969. Their purpose was not for fame, but to see if they could preserve the beauty of the American Falls. Their first goal was to stop the water from flowing over the American Falls in order to study the rock formations below the falls. By diverting the water to the Canadian Falls and dumping dirt above the American Falls, they systematically built a dam and stopped the water. Over the years, large rocks continually fell to the base of the falls. There was a concern that the falls might eventually become a rapids. The study, however, concluded that it would be too expensive to remove the rocks. It was decided to let Mother Nature take its course and remove the dam. The falls presents a formidable challenge, and for the seeker of fame, it was an irresistible hurdle to prove to oneself and others that they were worthwhile. The stutter is now a mere voice from the past, barely discernible above the thunderous roar of Hinu's voice. For in the end, it is the eternal river that wins. Take a glimpse at eternity with its never-ending groan and tireless catapulting waters. Surely, as the early Indian had stated, only a god could dwell within such magnificent beauty and power.